Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Writers Workshop. In tonight's session, we will continue to focus on story elements. So tonight, our focus is conflict and resolution, and I am very excited to welcome back local author and Jane Austen buff, Jeanette Watts. Jeanette, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Okay, hi. Hi, everybody. Anybody who thinks they're going to just watch me talk and just sit there and stare, I'm sorry, but I'm not one of those sorts of talkers. I can listen to myself talk all day long, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. So our topic today, writing conflict and resolution. So let's just start. We all learn to be writers by being readers. So let's just start with, what's one of your favorite books that is inspiring? I'll go first because I have an assistant who tell me, give the first example. Okay, fine. So I'm going to say Gone with the Wind because, yeah, I'm that kind of geeky. So if Gone with the Wind is one of my favorite books, why? Well, Margaret Mitchell happened to be she was actually a reporter who had a broken leg and sat down and wrote a book that was she was hiding it under the couch and things like that until somebody came along and said, we're looking for Southern writers. And she said, I wasn't going to say anything. And he's like, well, good, because yours wouldn't be any good anyway. And she went, yo, mama, and pulled out all the envelopes and turned it in, and bam, it's Gone with the Wind. So, but there's all kinds of hidden research bits in there. But anyway, besides all that, Gone with the Wind, one of my favorite books. Somebody else, name a book that you happen to be rather fond of, changes your life, doesn't change your life, but it's one of your favorite writing. You look like you're about to say something, but then didn't. Okay. Prince of Tides. Now, keep in mind that, doesn't mean the rest of us are going to know what the book is, so you're going to be you're the local expert on it. I'm just going to change colors here so we can tell each other apart here. Yeah?
Simon versus the Homo sapien agenda.
What is it?
Simon versus the Homo sapien agenda.
Simon versus Homo sapien agenda. And with a title like that, I have obviously got to read that. Parable of the Sower. S-E-W-E-R?
I think it's S-O-W.
Of course, I was just thinking, I bet you it's going to be that one. I'm a seamstress, so of course, sewing. Yeah?
Normal people.
Normal People. Another one with a great title. Okay. Now now we have some examples to work with. So, one of the questions that I want to ask is, what was the conflict? Now, in my case, I'm just going to say Scarlet versus the world. Everything was conflict. I mean, we had a war going on, but that wasn't the only conflict. It was her against everything. So let's see. Prince of Tides. Where's Prince of Tides? Yeah. What's the conflict?
I can't remember the guy's first name. The main character.
Mm-hmm.
Versus his past.
Okay, so we'll just say a man versus his past. I like that. Simon versus the Homo sapien agenda. What's the?
A gay teenager against society.
Teenager versus society. Parable of the Sower.
That would be a woman versus a post-apocalyptic world.
Woman versus world. So we're back to Scarlet. Normal people? Who's it?
Teenagers versus, society.
I'm detecting some themes here. So, since this is about conflict resolution, number 3, what's the resolution? Scarlet versus the world won. And that's actually the reason that the first book I wrote is kind of like a Yankee version of Gone with the Wind. It's like it has an ambiguous ending just like Gone with the Wind, because I think those ambiguous endings will stick in your craw. It's like, how many of you guys know Casablanca, the movie? I mean, if Casablanca would have had like a different ending, and it's like she just, the original script, Elsa just ran off with Rick. How much less memorable would it be with a just plain old happy ending? That not quite, that unsettling ending, I think can really stick in our craw, and that's Gone with the Wind, I think, is the world won. What? Moby Dick. The whale won. What? We can't have that. All right, Prince of Tides. What's our resolution?
He comes to terms with his past, maybe not in what he thought it was going to be, but he comes to terms with his past, with some damage.
Past. Took damage. Again, an unsettling ending. So it's not just la la la, happily ever after. Has anybody, what were they called? Harlequin romances? Anybody read the Harlequin romances? I mean, they were just like, spit these things out, whatever, and it was kind of like la 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 la, and they lived happily ever after. It's like, is that why they're all like so forgettable? All right, Simon versus the Homo sapien agenda.
The teenager got what he wanted in the end.
Hey, teenager wins. Instead of the world won, this time the teenager won. How about Parable of the Sower?
It's both. So she survives against all odds, but also the world takes so much, it kind of wins too. So
She survives, world is a better place?
no.
No.
The world, it's like she wins and the world wins, or she loses and I don't know. It's
It's complicated. She survives, world wins. It's complicated. We are getting a very interesting pattern here. Okay, normal people.
The two kids heal each other but don't end up together.
Not conventional romance ending. Okay. So now, the last question is, why, of the things we've listed, why do we find that compelling? Why is this so much better? Why is this the one you remember, not the Harlequin romance novels? Now, in my case, I'm going to be absolutely honest with you. I'm just in love with Rhett Butler, so it has nothing to do with the plot at all. I just love Rhett Butler. So I'm just going to say, I love Rhett. So it was all, for me, it was about the characters and the history and all the things. The plot is not the thing that has made me read it over and over and over again. It's we were talking history before, and the fact that I find that when you can trust the historian in the writer, I will go to any lengths to have, if I say that it's 1875 and it's raining, it's because I read it in a newspaper from 1875 in the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh, because history, get it right. Otherwise, somebody's going to go, oh, honey, didn't you know there was a drought that year? And you've just lost every Pittsburgher who ever went to elementary school in Pittsburgh. Great. So, all right. So, why I found Gone with the Wind compelling? I'm just a hormonal teenager, was in love with Rhett Butler. So, Prince of Tides, man versus his past, comes to terms with his past, but took some damage.
In college, switching majors, became an English major.
Uh-huh.
And this is I took a fiction class, my very first fiction class. That was the first book I read, and Patrick Conroy his writing just moved me. And so it made me just immediately hooked to it.
So it was really, again, more about the writing style than about the plot and all that. We are going to unleash some deep, dark secrets here, as we're supposed to be talking about plot elements, right? Okay, next is Simon versus the Homo sapien agenda.
Characters.
The characters? Characters are, you love the characters. They stand out. Parable.
For me, it was like the author's genius for being able to, it was, you mentioned history with the first one, the second one, future, like that having a futuristic vision based on such wide-ranging present day circumstances at the time she was writing. So it was, I don't know how to say that succinctly. It was like I was enraptured with like her, the author's capacity to see everything and then imaginatively put that out versus like loving the characters or, you know, the writing style. It was, yeah.
Author's vision.
Author's vision.
Okay, and normal people. What do you find compelling about it? What makes the story compelling for you?
I love
I'm sorry, what's that?
the character.
Characters? I'm seeing some patterns here. So when we're talking about the elements, the different elements of story, notice what's happened to the plot. That is not why we're reading the books. Kind of disturbing, isn't it? All right, shall we get on to talking about conflict? And even though conflict is not why we're even reading the books, what happens if you have a story with no conflict? Okay, Gone with the Wind. What if we took out the conflicts? No Civil War, no Yankees versus Southern girl. No, I mean, the world. You have there's nothing left. If it's Scarlet versus the world, then now you have no world. What should you do, floating in a vacuum? So that just doesn't work. Prince of Tides. Can we take the conflict out of the story? What happens to the writing style? There's nothing to talk about. Simon, what happens if you're taking the conflict out?
Just be standing there.
Not much to do with it. Parable of the Sower. Where's the author's vision without the conflict?
Yeah, there's no vision, there's no world, there's no vision.
There's no vision. And normal people. We got characters, but not much to talk about. So even though you're now confessing that the plot is not the thing that makes you drives you back, it's the framework that your story's going to hang on. So now you get to stand and watch me erase the whole board, which is going to take me a second. I didn't think about this part of it. I grew up in a high school that had, like, the walls were all marker boards. It was a brand new high school. It was, like, built in 1776. It says how old I am. But we were the Eagles because the school was built in 76. But marker boards that just went around the walls. So, yeah.
I just want to ask one quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Those 5 people you just had talk about the books,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be anxious to know, do they continue to read books by those authors, or is it just that one? I know you said that.
Yeah, no, I've read, whenever I go travel, I'll do a book search and try to find his original stuff. He has so much stuff out there.
Okay.
But I've read all his work at least twice, each one of his books. Prince of Tides, I think I read it yearly since college.
Wow. That's pretty good.
I usually read more than one. If I fall in love with the book, I would read more.
Very good all style reading.
All her.
Normal people,
I've only read the book once, and both of the author ones, but none of her other things are as great, but it was the one that really predicted me.
So, good question. Thank you. All right, so reasons for conflict. We've already said it's the framework that you're hanging everything on. There's no story if you don't have some sort of conflict. So it gives the story direction, motion, purpose. The plot is establishing a conflict at the beginning of the story, resolving by the end. That's what a plot is. It's the definition. It helps with character development. We'll talk more about that later. And obviously, as we just said, if you take the conflict out of the story, there's not much left of the story. Well, we can, there are several, if you put on, what are the different kinds of conflicts, you'll find lists of 4, list of 5, list of 6, list of 3, list of 2. Here's my compilation that seems to be fairly unique. I think we can, they succinct, that's what I say. We're going to start with character versus self. So, whoa, there we go. Probably should have left a little more room underneath that. So character versus self, internal conflict. I think probably the first thing everybody says when the character versus yourself, everybody says Hamlet first. So we'll say it. There's a problem. That's a play, not a book. But hey, whatever. We've said it, right? We got it out of there. Pride and Prejudice. Since I write Jane Austen novels, among other things, but Lizzie and Darcy, one could say, is it a book one against the other? You could say that. Both of these characters, though, also have a learning process and their growth and discovery, finding out, wow, I was really a jerk. Both characters, by the end, wow, I was really a jerk. Sorry about that. So is it character versus self? Anybody else want to give an example of a story that is character? Any of those things, either the examples we've used? Wait a minute, yours was a character versus self, right?
Yeah, it's more of a character versus like he was coming to terms with like
His past, yeah.
Self, repressed memories, but yeah, it's him coming to terms with what happened to him in the past.
Right. Anybody else? Can you think of a character versus themselves? It's okay if we don't come up with more. That's right. We'll just put Hamlet here for now because we all know what that. It is the classic story, even though it's stories. It really doesn't matter if it's written. I mean, everything is stories. Our brains are wired for narrative. We find narratives where there isn't one because it's how our brains are wired. So, all right. Well, character versus self is one. Number 2, kind of obvious, is character versus character. And again, this is not a not a book, but Star Wars, Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader. Woohoo! Bad guys versus good guys. There's so mysteries are almost always character versus character as a genre. Not always, but a lot of them. And romantic comedies. Most of the time when you have, and I say romantic comedy, you can have other kinds of romances, but I think that the nice thing about the romantic comedy, I mean, oh my God, talk about a trope. It's like, can you do anything that isn't part of the expected, whatever, trope. I'm so tired of that word, thank you very much. But what is it? Boy versus girl, battle of the sexes. By the end, there's a meeting of the minds and bodies. Okay, so character versus character. Anybody else want to give an example of a favorite book that's a good character versus character? I don't want to talk. Okay. Number 3, character versus society. We've had that one already. We've had that twice already, right? I think that most young adult fiction.
That book was the young adult book.
Yeah, I think a lot of young adult stuff is this is where, your society is a society of your peers, and it could be kind of a brutal universe. So a lot of the young adult stuff. Hunger Games is young adult, and that's.
Post-apocalyptic, like all post-apocalyptic literature.
Apocalyptic. There, is that close? Did I get it right? Spilling it sideways here, writing sideways. There's a genre that there's a whole separate genre that only shows up sometimes. It's like not just post-apocalyptic, but specifically in like climate environment is like becoming its own subgenre that is definitely the character versus society and that sort of thing.
Like the asteroid, you have to move the asteroid out of the way.
Yeah.
So this is
And
completely.
here's a classic one, The Scarlet Letter, Nathaniel Hawthorne.
I was just gonna say a lot of classic literature is character versus society, or like a commentary on society,
Mm-hmm.
like on poverty or systems or misogyny.
Dickens.
Exactly.
Yeah, just anything by Charles Dickens. Yes, anytime you're commenting on society, you've got that. All right. Does anybody read A Gentleman in Moscow? It's kind of a slow-moving book, but it is a character versus society. And all right, next one, character versus. Oh yeah, and I found some of my lists. I went looking through to see besides my own list and all that. It's like, okay, how do other people put it? I found so many versions: man versus man, man versus machine, man versus self, and it's kind of like, what is this, the 50s? So it's like character is like, protagonist doesn't have a gender, right? We have words for that. All right, so it's our character versus we'll call it the supernatural, but that can be versus God versus fate, if we get, Oedipal or Greek. So, speaking of which, how many of the Greek tragedies are all character versus fate, supernatural, and all that? So we could put in here Greek tragedies, which again aren't books, but that would probably be a really great novel. Like, pick your Greek tragedy and make a modern version of it. There you go. Whole set of books I don't have time to write. Okay, so I'd written actually in Homer's The Odyssey, which is there. Here's our Greek myth. The other thing that I've got in here, the Thornbirds. Did anybody ever read the Thornbirds? This is like 80s. I mean, it's like Colleen McCullough. They did make a TV. You know how it is. Hollywood says. It was a book. It was actually, I read it in high school because I was in forensics, and it's like, do a speech and everything. And the teacher said, oh, because you have red hair, you should read a passage from Maggie. Do Maggie's first day at school. And I read it, and it's about her first day of school, and it goes really badly, and she throws up and everything, and I'm like, I am not doing this. I picked a different category. I did fairy tales. But that's why I even ever read the book, was because I said, hey, you've got red hair, do this character. Yeah, Maggie versus God, God wins. No, I was 16 years old. I wanted something happier, like fairy tales, because fairy tales aren't dark. Yeah, I was a dumb kid. All right, next one, and this is character versus technology. I am separating out technology from society. I mean, you could just say character versus environment, but the way that a character fights society versus the way a character fights technology, I think that's too different to lump into one. Right? So, can we just say science fiction in general? Does that cover it? So, character versus technology. One that is completely different, though. Did anybody remember the story of John Henry? Yes. There have been actually several novels kind of on it, but I mean, this is an old folk tale, and it's man versus the machine. Man wins the race against the machine and then dies. So what is the lesson here? I know, again, kind of, a lot of these folk tales can be kind of dark, actually. Last thing, and this is not a book kind of thing, infomercials. How much of the point of an infomercial is you've got something and gee, it's like you have a problem in your life, but we've got technology to make your life better. It's still a narrative, even if the narrative is the technology will help you. Then there's the practice, does it really? But that is the narrative structure is character and technology, if not necessarily versus. So it's a weak one, but we'll go with it. Lastly, and this is another, you could lump it in with environment, but I don't like it when you lump them in. Character versus nature. So we talk about where were we? Back at the post-apocalyptic one. If it's if your character versus climate change, you know, these aren't all hard and fast rules. And my computer got bored with me. It's like, okay, so Moby Dick, I brought up before, is, you know, character versus nature. Nature won. Jack London's To Build a Fire. Nature won. And I think a lot of other Jack London's other books are also in that category. Pardon me? Old Man and the Sea, yes. That's a really good one. And to completely change genres, Laura Ingalls' Little House books. Most of the books are about just trying to survive nature. They're in, you know, they're in the cute little log cabin in the woods, but we're going to go out to the prairie where everything tried to kill us. Malaria tried to kill us, and the Indians burning they their yearly burn the fields. Oops, we were living in the middle of that field and we almost got burnt down. And then the fever, I mean, it's always something. They're constantly on the verge of death. I mean, they're building the log cabin and one of the logs rolled off and like nearly crushed her foot. How would they have survived if Ma's ankle was like any more badly damaged? They're out in the middle of nowhere. How could she possibly have gotten any kind of medical care? So nature, it's a lot of man versus nature all the way through. Long Winter's book 8, when they had a really, really bad winter, and yeah, the snow tried to kill everybody in town. So this is the framework that you hang the important parts of the character on, because if you don't have a conflict, so anybody have any more commentary on these are your basic categories? Hearing nothing. Oh, I had a commentary. Harry Potter is all of them. I was writing out the notes and I went, whoa, okay, Harry versus himself, his own self-doubts, that happens plenty. I think book 4 is probably the one with the most doubts. Character versus character, Harry versus Voldemort, and Harry versus the blonde kid from the other school, from Slytherin. Draco. Thank you, from Draco Malfoy. You know. Character versus society. The number of times, like everybody in Hogwarts hates him because this is a story about middle school, and then of course later on it's other parts of society, like when the evil teachers are taking over, and you know, Harry's in the newspaper for being bad. Character versus the supernatural. Plenty of that. Character versus technology. Well, he's got all of this wizarding equipment to contend with. So how do you use this wand? How do you use this thing? And does it always go well? Sometimes it goes great. Sometimes, like the car thing, doesn't go so well. So character versus nature. How did I write myself a note on that one? So what's that? Yes. Oh my God, yes. Harry versus the Whomping Willow, and the Whomping Willow nearly won a lot of times. So yeah, so Harry Potter is all of them. And I do have to ask, is that part of the appeal of those books? Yeah. Has everybody heard the same advice I have? Everything, write a series, everything should be a series. What if I don't want to write a series? After I wrote after the Wealth and Privilege, I wasn't going to write another book. I did. I didn't mean to. It happened anyway. But I wasn't going to. It was fine by itself.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
What would you put, like, because I'm seeing a lot of things, I'm trying to figure out in my head, like, the character versus the unknown. Not necessarily fighting the supernatural, not the God, not the fate, but the thing is in each one of those, he doesn't know what's going on. It's the unknown, I think, is something else that could be put in there as well. Because he doesn't
That's really insightful. Yes. So does that stand as a category on its own?
I mean, it could.
I kind of like that.
I was trying to go through all of them.
Uh-huh.
The thing is the unknown is in all of them.
Yes. Character versus self. You know, if you don't know, if you knew yourself, then you wouldn't have a problem. You wouldn't be fighting yourself, right? I suppose you kind of know your enemy.
Not necessarily, not unless, not
But-
because I'm going to share a personal story because I just
Yes.
moved into a new apartment.
Uh-huh.
And so it's a one-bedroom, it's just a whole bunch of one-bedrooms. And so one day I come home from work and there's a note written on my door saying that I'm closing my cabinets too loudly. And I don't know who it is. And so, exactly, so he wrote me a 2-page letter. He left some little doorstops in the baggie hooked to my door. And I know and so I'm sitting there just like, who is this? I have no idea who this is. I came home randomly on a Tuesday night, and this is what's on my door.
Complaining about how you close your cabinet doors.
We're still fighting nowadays because I just had to talk with him before I left because he came. I basically told him if he has a problem with me, come talk to me face to face. And so he came and knocked on my door tonight because I was playing Sherlock Holmes just a little bit too loudly before I was coming over here. And it was just one scene where the gun goes off a little louder than usual, and it kind of vibrated his ceiling a little bit. So the whole character versus character, I unknowingly walked into this because I moved into this new apartment. So character versus character, we're gonna have some. It's gonna be a year-long lease. We're gonna have some interesting not fights, but discussions. What's going to happen next? So when I came into that's the whole character versus character thing.
Yes. So although we could say that's the circumstance was what the unknown thing, not that you know who now that you've got the adversary, you know the adversary. But that is still a fair point. I like that. All right, character versus society. Is society unknown? Do we not know the rules we're breaking or that when it's character versus. Yes, good point. So the rules change. Did you know that?
You go travel. Like if you go to the Midwest, you go up to the Northeast. Like I said, completely different set of rules that you live up there with.
Yes.
We kind of one thing I found was how we scorn our homeless and everything like that. They're so more welcome up there in the Northeast because it's the Northeast and it gets cold and people got to survive. So
Yeah.
Hospitality
Hospitality rules are different.
hospitality rules are different.
Yes, and that is, we're talking about a conflict. You show up, and there's then the conflict. If it was, you don't know the rules of society, there's your conflict. Yes.
Well, it seems to me that uncertainty is just, it's the fabric, it's the given, it's the content. It's just like there's a character in every story. There's uncertainty unknown in every story because that's
Yep.
life. That's an inherent fundamental foundation of life.
Which is what makes the storytelling compelling, is how the hero of this story dealt with the unknown/uncertainty.
And if you want to think break the fourth wall, when a writer's writing, he's creating that uncertainty. Like in my book, Prince of Tides, I'm always trying to think of how is he going to solve this? What's the actual story about? And then once you get to the point, once you get to that certainty, then all the stuff, the uncertain stuff that you're going through leads up to this certain thing. Is that all that unknown uncertainty leads you to a certain point?
These are both really amusing when we think about mysteries. Mysteries are about the unknown and uncertainty until you get, and what's the conclusion? The murder is no longer unknown. It's no longer, we don't have uncertainty. We know who done it. So that's what makes them satisfying. And let's see, so character versus nature. I suppose the uncertainty is you never know what nature's going to throw at you today. So technology, the uncertainty is, it's every bit as bad as nature, isn't it? So, how many things on my iPhone can I not work?
It's also you don't know what they're going to invent next. I'm sorry, AI. They could come up with anything like that.
Yeah.
Who knows what AI? They're making progress in that. We're not peons, but we are in the unknown of people who are working on these things who are in the know, who know more about it than we do.
Yeah. So if you're doing a grand science fiction story, the new technology. On the other hand, if you're writing an Irma Bombeck style short story, just trying to, just today, I do a lot of volunteering, and I had a lady today that I was talking to, and she's like, I'm 76 years old and I don't know how to use this app. I got a Motorola and I can't do the thingy. There is no box to type in here. It's like, let me find somebody who knows how to help you, because this is beyond my pay grade, because I'm no good at this stuff either. So, but versus technology, the uncertainty is I can't use this app. I can't, whatever. So it's always wrestling. And so, okay, well, probably need to clean off the board and start over, don't we? Now that we've filled it completely. So I was in high school. Just as we stopped using whiteboards, were the cool thing that only the shiny new school had. They still had chalkboards around in all the other high schools, except for like brand new one. So, everybody here have a story they're in the process of working on? Yeah, I figured. So, questions for your story. Number one is, which kind of conflict does your story need? So, as we've already ascertained, a lot of this is genre-driven. So, as we've just listed all those different genres, man versus nature versus, science fiction is man versus technology, whatever. On the other hand, you've got choices to make. Are you going to follow the genre rules because that's all the advice you're getting by saying, do you want to actually sell books? Do you want to be a best-selling author? Follow the tropes. Just do what everybody else does. Just keep with the expectations. Don't do anything unusual or original or anything like that, because you want to sell and people want to read what they're already reading. I don't know if I believe that or not, but that's the advice that is out there. Has everybody all heard that kind of advice? Just follow the tropes.
That sounds weird. You should be creative. I mean, sure, you should follow some of the rules of why in order to make a good story. Like, have character development, have conflict, have a plot and stuff like that. But you still need to focus on writing a clear story, else your audience will be bored. I mean, there's a cartoon called High Guy Spice, and it's the most generic cartoon I've ever seen in my entire life, and everyone hated it.
Yep, sometimes creativity it can be a little out there, but as we've already ascertained, the conflict isn't what makes your story memorable, special, why people are going to be someday sitting in a library talking about their favorite books and what made that book so meaningful. It wasn't the conflict. The conflict is the structure upon which you're going to hang your creativity upon. So you don't have to reinvent the topic of conflict. What does your story need? And as we saw with J.K. Rowling, if you need all of them, go for it. It worked for her. It could work for your story too, if that's the right thing. So, and of course, he keeps getting bored with me. So my latest book, my Dearest Miss Fairfax, the story is about keeping a secret. And so the conflict is anyone or anything that gets close to finding out the secret. You have to do whatever to keep the secret. So therein lies the conflict with everybody and everything. So there's my example. Anyways, I already said it's already often genre-driven. Oh yes, so more important perhaps than just generically man versus nature or pick from the menu is, and this is much more to your story, is what does your character want? It takes so long to write. That's why people do slides. But then we couldn't talk together. So what does your character want? And the second part of that is, we'll pay A and B. What are the obstacles? Now it's getting more personal. So this is more about your particular story than just what kind of conflict. Once you have your, once you know what your character wants, I mean, that's one of the most important things. Does everybody know right now what their character wants? And everybody knows what the obstacles are? That's the thing. Another way to, yeah, if there's obstacles, there's usually an antagonist, right? You get a protagonist, you're going to have an antagonist. So, number 3, what are the opposing values of the antagonist? Now, if the antagonist, say, is society, it still works in terms of opposing values. You know, you've got the, what is it you're fighting against? What is it you want? And the obstacles are these opposing values. In the process of defining these, it also defines your character better. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Does anybody want to tell us about their character? Tell us a story.
Okay, so, sorry, I'm writing it.
It's a story for me.
But, so basically, my character's name is Jake.
Uh-huh.
And he's been living in an orphanage for 7 years. And basically, it's like a self-discovery journey of like he doesn't feel happy with his life necessarily. So one day he gets a letter from his aunt, and he feels very excited, like maybe he actually has family somewhere in the world.
He wants out of here.
Yeah.
And it's not so much, this one isn't an obstacle, it's an opportunity to change your life.
There are actually quite a lot of obstacles.
Uh-huh.
It's not really a traditional, like, coming-of-age story. It's more of a science fiction mythology.
Excellent.
Of he encounters sea monsters along the way that are trying to stop him in the 2070s.
Excellent. I like sea monsters. It sounds very, like as I said, mythology, like Jason and the Argonauts. So now there is, okay, so the opposing values, you can have like the two characters want the same thing. So if the protagonist and the antagonist want the same thing, so you were fighting over a bone of contention. The one ring that shall rule them all. There's our example of that. The other thing is you can be having opposing values. So conservative versus liberal. Name 2 sports teams that don't like each other. I'm not a sports person, but you know. Am I seriously in a room full of like book people and no sports fans? Okay. What's that? Cubs versus Cardinals. There you go. You know, you have. Yeah. So you know that's. Let's say we'll call it an artificial value because you know they all value, say, baseball, but those rivalries are very intense. And what is it you want? Well, to win, duh. So it gives you a very strong, what do you want? And what are you willing to sacrifice to get what you want in the process of winning? We got to start on the story. Now, and this fits in with, was it Jason? What's your hero's name? Jake. Okay. So the next question is about raising the stakes. What are you going to do to raise the stakes as your protagonist is fighting their way through? Now, I have seen story, everybody heard the term story arc? So I've seen it as like, okay, so you have exposition, start of the story, explaining who everybody is. And then you have telling the story, here's the climax, there's the denouement. It's like, or actually, this is the, that's not the best stories. It's like, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's it. But more often, and it's just not usually pointed out this way, but you're coming along, and you raise the stakes, and you raise the stakes. So it's not a pyramid, it's really a stepped pyramid, at least on the way up. This looks like, now this, although in the end, usually it's like climax, this, it's a roller coaster.
Chutes and ladders.
Yes, this is chutes and ladders, absolutely. So if you think, you've got, coming along, okay, you've got an obstacle, overcame that one. You come another, Little House on the Prairie books. Okay, so they moved to the prairie and they survived malaria. And they survived the Indians burning the prairie down. And they survived the winter storm. And they survived, I can't remember what happens next. And then this is probably usually would be saved for the biggest life-threatening moment. And then, yay, they made it through to the end of the story. Let's start it over again with the next book. But there's several challenges as opposed to one that you can have little ones on the way to the big one. But every one of these things, what you're doing is you're raising the stakes. I can't get what I want. I had an obstacle in the way. Well, the obstacles keep getting more formidable in the process of good storytelling. Is anybody very familiar with fairy tales? No? Grimm's fairy tales? Oh, yeah. It's another one of those things where it's like little by little, you've got the hero and he goes off to do the thing, and so you have to rescue the princess, right? There's a plot, there's the plot. Man, rescue princess, go home, marry princess, now you're a prince and you're going to be king someday because you did the king a favor by rescuing the princess. Well, you're going to have this, first you have to, or the labors of Hercules. What, 7 labors? He goes, okay, yay, I got all, I've completed all of the labors. So you've got that, there's your trajectory. Does that all work? So if you have like several incidences as opposed to, okay, gotta ask, how many of you, plotters versus pantsers, right? How many of you write an outline for the whole thing and then fill it in? How many just start writing and find out what happens? There's nothing wrong with either one. You will find out after you've written your book, go back. And the structure was already there, you just didn't write it by the outline. I am not a plotter. I put things in the book that don't always go the way I think they do. The characters tell me how this is going to be. My first book, he's in love with a woman that he can't have. I put a pretty sexy maid in there for him to have a little side dalliance with. That character is a one-woman kind of guy, and he just would not look at her no matter what I did. It's like he just would not look at her. There is just no denying that your characters take on a life of your own. And if you try to force them to that outline because it was in the plan, because it was obstacle number 3, well, maybe there's a different obstacle that would work better. So trust your instincts and let the characters take you where they're going, because somewhere inside of your head, it is all you. But so trusting yourself instead of just your outline is something to think about. So, all right. So do I have any other notes? Because we have like 9 minutes left here. Oh yes. Next question. Are there any subplots that will enrich the story? Subplots, of course, are just, if these are the obstacles, the subplots can either go along like that with you, or the subplots, my hands are going to be covered in colors now. the subplots can do this. But once again, we're talking about, we realize that the plot is not the thing that makes you reread your favorite book. It's the other textual things. Gone with the Wind, the subplot is the Civil War going through there, and those are the details that I find so compelling. So the subplot is that you've got is sort of the environment, but a little more than just that. So the subplot says, my last book, my Dearest Miss Fairfax, I took Emma, Jane Austen's Emma, and retold it from the point of view of one of the other characters. And it's just a subplot in Emma. But it's only as I pulled out those details, it was like, oh yeah, that subplot, it's kind of like a murder mystery where they didn't solve the murder. It's like, there's like, oh, these little nuggets all the way through. But when you highlight it with a pink highlighter, because that's the character you're talking about, there was a lot of detail in there. Like, okay, that was really interesting. It was a really fun book to write. But it was just the subplot that gave a lot of texture. If you pulled it out, Emma would still be a pretty good book. Great characters, a lot of fun. It was just the depth of the tapestry, or the colors in the tapestry. So how much they impact your characters, that's on you. But it really does give you extra, I thought I had a hand over there, so. Subplots. Oh yeah, so I put my little note in here is Gone with the Wind. The plot is Scarlett wants Ashley. Everything else is a subplot. So, all right, visual elements. Talking about that vision. You know, your visual, and somebody else is talking about like the depth of the writing and all that. Remember that as we are reading, part of what I think gets to be really compelling is sort of sensory experiences. The way I like to describe it when I'm talking about, when I was working on my historical fiction and somebody said, geez, why don't you stop researching already? Geez. It's like, if I cannot tell you what it sounded like, what it smelled like, and what it tasted like, I'm not done yet. You have to be able to taste it, or it's not ready. So it's like some people, like they have people read all the way wrong. I'm going to write 6 drafts before I let anybody read because it wasn't ripe yet. So why would I waste somebody else's time when I can't tell you what it tastes like yet? So everybody's got a different writing process, and that's just mine, is that I have to put all that in there. But keeping in mind that the sensory nature of it is really a lot of what we're enjoying out of a good writer. So tell your audience, what does it taste like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? And of course, getting creative, like, you know, just trying not to use, like, back to that trope thing. Let's just keep ticking on the tropes here, you know. Someone gave an example of, you know, how do you describe the heroine? You know, well, she was a blonde with blue eyes. Okay, that tells you some basics, but somebody in the process of discussing the heroine said nothing about anything else except she was sparrow-boned. It's like, whoa. So now you've got this image of, you know, delicate, but at the same time, do we know what hair and eye color it is? How much does that even matter? You know, she was sparrow-boned. So she's probably not a weightlifter. You know, so having ways to describe your character do not need to be the mundane details. In all of Jane Austen, you almost never know what color the eyes or hair are on any of the characters. Lizzie Bennet, we know she has fine eyes, but I can't tell you what color they are. She never says. So finding ways to say things. The sound god is like, I'm just going to creep in here very quietly until I pick on him for coming in. But working on your details, look for ways to say it that aren't the standard ones. Describe their, I hate to say the soul, their essence. Describe what is it you like about, think about your best friend. What is it that you love about them? It's not that they have blonde hair and blue eyes, or black hair and brown eyes, or whatever. You know, those are the things to work on with your character development that gives you what does it taste like, what does it smell like, what does it feel like. So those are the depths and that's where you really get to use your personal voice, because the way you see the world isn't like the way anybody else sees the world. So that's what you get. That's why we love writing. All right, resolution. We're supposed to talk about that, and I have 3 minutes to talk about wrapping up while we wrap up. So, resolution seems kind of obvious, but we've already talked about how it sticks in your craw when the wrap-up isn't a good wrap-up, like Casablanca or Gone with the Wind. Does everybody know the lady, O. Henry's The Lady or the Tiger? It's a short story with, you don't know the ending, you don't know what happened. Schrodinger's cat. Maybe he's dead, maybe he's alive, you don't know. And the writer asks you, because he's that kind of jerk, what do you think? Is he alive or dead? And that's why that's his most famous story, I think. So, all right, so resolution. The character successfully wins the conflict or not? In our favorite stories, we've already talked about, well, the world wins. Well, the character wins, sort of, but the world wins too. Your resolution, how you wrap things up, like me, the first book I chose not to wrap it up. I like Gone with the Wind. I like the ambiguous ending. And I got threatened to be run over by a bus because Margaret Mitchell got hit by a bus. That's how she died. And so when I'd said, well, you're writing me another book. I don't know the ending. I said, Margaret Mitchell never wrote another book after Gone with the Wind. Margaret Mitchell got hit by a bus. You're writing me another book. So I had to write another book. So I found out what happens. I honestly didn't know, but I had to find out because my life was threatened. But, you know, you get to make those choices. Is the ending happily ever after? Yay, because it really feels good. Is it more sticking in your craw? Or I'm going to needle the audience and you have to, like, oh, Henry, you tell me what you think the ending is. But the darndest thing is, even if the ending is ambiguous, the readers still know something of what's going on. They still know that, oh, Henry's a jerk and didn't give us the ending. But, you know, you have some form of reference. Chekhov's gun. This is really a theater principle. If a gun gets placed on the mantelpiece in the middle of scene 4, everybody noticed that somebody put a gun on the mantelpiece. Either you use that gun, or everybody's going to be really annoyed with you because what was with the gun? If it was a red herring, it's like, oh, he put the gun there, so we weren't noticing that the thing that was also being put over there. Got it. But things like that are things you could put in for color. If you want to, like, distract your audience, yeah, we're making a big deal about putting the gun on the mantelpiece. Or now, next time you're watching TV, watch for the Chekhov's gun. You know, ooh, in scene 2, something was put over here. Wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. Oh, there, the hero picked up the gun and shot it because the bad guy walked in. Okay. So it's a tool to use. It's a tool to play with when you want to play with the tropes. All right. There is a difference between the resolution when the character solves the problem and ends the conflict, and the denouement when the readers get to see the aftermath. Is life better? Is life not better? Hunger Games, life isn't necessarily better. Harry Potter, she gave us that, I'm sorry, I don't like the denouement. Look, and they're in the future and everything's happily ever. She shouldn't have gone there, but that's my opinion. But have once you get to your conclusions and wrap things up, just don't be afraid to play with your choices. Write 3 endings. Have people read them and see what they think. By the way, has everybody worked with an editor of some sort or other? Something to keep in mind. None of us is a perfect writer. Editors, it's like, oh my God, there's so much money. I do not use just a professional editor. I just happen to have a lot of really fearsomely smart friends, and I do not put a book out until it's been read 16 times by 16 people that are handed a copy of the manuscript and a red pen. With that red pen is like, you show me all the ways I've screwed up. Do not let me embarrass myself. That's how much I trust you. So do not think of it as a criticism as you go to it. Never be afraid of editors. Remember that it's just opinion. You can always countermand and say, you don't know what you're talking about. But have people read your things, including the endings. Have your resolution. I thought it would end it like this, but I could also try this. There's nothing wrong with collecting opinions. And there's nothing wrong with accepting good advice. There's also a matter of remember to trust yourself. It is your story, no matter what anybody else says. But having a lot of eyes and a lot of brains looking at your writing, it can feel very vulnerable. It can feel like, it's like a personal criticism. Keep in mind that if somebody finds a way you would have embarrassed yourself in public when it went to print, but instead you had eyes who found those mistakes for you and kept you from embarrassing yourself, that is a good thing, not a bad thing. So just trust other people's eyes on your works, and don't be afraid to ask for more opinions. Hell, if there's something that this person said this thing, get 5 more people to say, yeah, they're right, or no. And of course, you'll have a 50-50% vote, and then it's up to you as to whether or not you want to take the advice or ignore the advice. So, all right, I've run 5 minutes over. Does anybody have any questions? And before I shut up and everybody can get on with their evening. Thank you so much for talking with me today and for participating.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. A big thank you to Jeanette. That was so much fun. Just a reminder, the next workshop will be on November 2nd, and that will be the workshop Finishing Your Story. And just another reminder, the short story contest is still open. Deadline is November 11th, Friday, November 11th. So hope to see you at the next workshop. Thank you.